It's great to be here. Um, After a long season of not reading poetry in person anywhere because of the plague that we've been going through.
Yeah.
My last book was Nightfall, uh, which is 2018. It's and it, like the book before it, Steptoe Butte, were written in a 21-line form that I invented based on Native American sources and ancient Greco-Roman poetry with a lot of parallel structure involved and stanzas. But I have recently, since I came back from Germany in 2019, I suddenly changed the way I write, as sometimes travel will do that for you. And so now I have a form, it's 15 lines long, and the lines are considerably shorter than the ones previously. So working with a short 15-line form of 5 lines of 3 stanzas each. I mean, of 3 lines each, 5 stanzas of 3 lines each. So I still have form to work with. I like working with form, especially the form I invent, and rather than open form, which form focuses me more, and I really appreciate that. So here's one. I have a group of poems that are about ready to be a book, tentatively titled Starry Night, after the Van Gogh painting that you probably all know, though it's not directly about Van Gogh. By the way, he regarded that painting as a failure. Yeah, because he thought the stars were overdone. But so I thought I'd read a selection of poems representing the group's poems that are in the book. And so I like crows. I know a lot of people don't, but I'm fond of crows, so I have several poems about them. And this one is called The Socialism of Crows. Every morning in my black robe, I'm out on the patio scattering bread, casually saying, caw. Silence rules the neighborhood until I hear a single caw from 3 backyards away. I go inside, and 2 minutes later, a murder of hefty crows lands on my patio and struts. Pulling rank within the flock, some seize bread and fly off ahead of everyone else. But everyone gets fed. Now that's the way economy should be. Enough for you, enough for me. Isn't that the essence of socialism? And great crow behavior sometimes. But how some steal bread and rush off ahead of everyone else, that also sounds familiar, doesn't it? So another thing I've been writing about, of course, is COVID, because how often do you get to live through a plague? That is to say, sometimes the world hands you some natural material, as Ed Marin found with his song. So this one is called During the Plague. And it's after reading the novel The Plague by Albert Camus, which I immediately pulled off my shelf. Hadn't read it since college days. And it's a remarkable novel if you've never read it. And the sort of the essence that Camus comes up with is the idea that the plague is actually the human condition. So this is called During the Plague, after Camus. The unknown hangs around, waiting for us to fail to see it coming. Who knew a virus could kill us all? COVID jumps from one to another, so speedily and so secretly, we never know who might carry. We share the grief of those whose elders and companions die alone. Survivors dread contamination. Coughing, feverish victims multiply, bodies left on streets or stored in ice-cold trucks parked by doors. Potter's fields are soon overwhelmed. Spirits flock to join the unnumbered dead. Future reader, the plague keeps coming. I'm also a gardener. And I have been for all my life. I know Gary Lark there is a gardener, and maybe some of the rest of you. It doesn't too often get into poems, unfortunately. As editor of Windfall, I've not seen all that many poems about gardening. So if you're a poet and you do gardening, here's your opportunity. So also in this poem are my grandchildren, which they're starting to show up in poems, which are always fun. And early wonder is a type of beet seed. Winter beets. In spring, I plant early wonders that slowly grow summer and fall. I leave them in the ground all winter and harvest 4 or 5 for dinner. Granddaughter asserts beets taste like dirt. Her brother hungers for any new food. He claims beets taste good. I tell him they will turn his pea red, but he doesn't believe me. His pea does turn red, and he grins. Granddaughter may yet taste earth in beets. Nothing like beets to garnish a winter table. Boiled, peeled, sliced, dash of balsamico, bath of sour cream. You get a recipe at the end. Then I have some poems that are drawn from ancient Greco-Roman sources. It's a particular interest of mine. It has been forever, it seems like. And so here's a poem called Decline and Fall. Of course, when you're talking about ancient Rome, this angle always comes up. And so I thought I'd try my hand at it. I mentioned Odoacer in here. He was the barbarian who seized the throne of Rome in 476 AD, bringing an end to the Roman Empire. The actual Roman ruler at the time was a 12-year-old Romulus Augustus. And Odoacer liked him and sent him off with a pension to go live in the country. And then Odoacer ruled for 16 years until Theodoric came along, invited him to dinner, and stabbed him to death. So Odoacer had quite a career, but he's only mentioned here in passing, but I just thought I should acknowledge who he was. Decline and Fall. In 15 lines, mind you. They say Rome fell not when barbarians overwhelmed the far-flung legions, nor when Odoacer seized the throne. Rome had fallen, they say, when ships bearing African grain no longer arrived. Latin devolved to polyglot jargon. What signs will signify when our empire falls like all others before? Perhaps when troops are withdrawn from 800 overseas bases. Perhaps when barbarians take over DC, looting billions from the treasury. Maybe our empire has already fallen when cruise ships bring cargoes of pandemic death and English devolves to Twitter and tweet. Have the barbarians taken over DC? Perhaps. Another kind of poem that's in this perspective book are love poems, all of them addressed to my wife of Utah. My wife Utah, after 40 years, we've been together for 40 years, though this was actually written on the 31st anniversary. Anniversary piece. Patty Whitney said, I must meet our German teacher. She introduced us on the run between classes. That very moment, I was attracted to you. I never imagined I could be found attractive by someone as beautiful, smart, and centered as you. Besides, we were both married to others. I put attraction out of my mind. Attraction climbed back into mind and grew. I began to imagine we could be together if you held me in the high regard that I held you. Out of such emotional trust does love begin, confirmed by first kiss, which leads to later stages of bliss, found only in dreams and deep exchange, psyches for bodies, bodies for full exaltation. And then a few poems from my childhood appear in this group. Childhood is always a vast source for material. And it seems to me the older that you get, the more you remember, suddenly things come back to you. And when I was a kid, I spent some time in, and I've got 5 poems about this, in the town of Bowville, Idaho, population 268. And here in this poem, which is set in 1953, 54, when I was 10 and 11, is sort of the view of the logging industry in its full frenzy in the 1950s, right? Everything is being cut and the trucks and people and men are moving in all directions. And it mentions stagged jeans. Maybe many of you here in Oregon would know what stagged jeans are, but maybe not, because it's a very definite term, which means that loggers would cut the bottom hem off the legs of their jeans. And so of course, the bottom would then shred kind of into threads hanging down. And this was so that you're working in the woods, no branch could catch on your jeans and drag you down, because it could be extremely dangerous. If you've ever tried to stagger through some slash, which I spent a lot of time doing because I was brush piling a lot as a young person. And you would know that stag jeans are great. I never wore them, but my father did. Bowville, 1953, 54. Each summer, Dad's accounting job drove him, logging camp to logging camp, doing the books. When I got to be 10 and 11, he took me along. First stop, Bowville, general office and warehouse. Dad toted clicks upon a mechanical calculator under the eyes of boss Ritzheimer. I watched. Warehouse men sort truckloads of logging supplies, axes, shovels, saws, wheels of rope and chain, cases of pork and beans stacked high as appetites, jugs of oil, fat cans of fruit, tomatoes, and meat. Floors cratered and splintered under caulk boots as men of the woods clomped in and out all day. The smell of wood was in the air. Men worked at the height of their physical powers. Well-fed men swaggered in hard hats, suspenders, and black stagged jeans. The frenzy of logging. Eventually, of course, everything was cut and the logging went away. And so I have poems about Bowville fallen on evil times after that. And now down to 268 people who carry the long decline, as I put it. So I also have some poems on contemporary politics, as probably many of you do, though most of my poems are political in some sense. And so here's one that's political, but it's also another Gardner poem. It's nice to combine these things. Charles Goodrich in Corvallis does a great job of combining politics and gardening. It's check a book of his called Going to Seed. It's really good. So turning compost before the next administration begins. And this would be at 18th of January, 2021. I fork in decomposing leaves like rough drafts. I fork in layers of chips reduced to coarse dirt. I dribble powdered nitrogen to stimulate decay. By late March, my compost bin bakes a rich loaf, packed with energy for growth. Garden mounds can't wait to feed. Grandfather soil, you need a full meal. Scarf up tomes of dead ideals, chow down weasel words and lies. By June, seed potatoes dine on compost cake. Greedy tubers wash it down with water and light. Become small suns for humans to consume. I fork in grief for all who died by Trump. I fork in raw hope for those who need food. Powers that be, you know how people are starving. Can't imagine we'd re-elect Trump, who's a mass murderer, unless 700,000 people isn't enough. Okay, and then another kind of poem that the poem derived from translations of Chinese poets. I love ancient Chinese poetry. In particular, I've gotten really entranced by the work of Cha Dao of the late Tang, 779 to 843. And Mike O'Connor was his translator. He translated a beautiful book called When I Find You Again, It Will Be in the Mountains. If you ever get a chance to get a hold of that, I recommend it. When I find you again, it will be in the mountains. And it's also a poem about aging, and Judith Barrington recently gave a reading in the Milwaukee Poetry Series, and she quoted her friend Maxine Kuhlman, who unfortunately died in 2014. But Maxine Kuhlman was a terrific poet, and she said, when we get to a certain age, we write deathy poems. Isn't that a great term? Deathy poems. And Judith Barrington read us a funny deathy poem about being in a grave. But deathy poems aren't always dark. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. Depends on how you deal with death. And as you get older, of course, you start to do that. This one is called Winter Night, after Cha Dao and Mike O'Connor. I don't know Chinese, so I have to credit Mike O'Connor. Crows have blended into night. Quiet falls like snow. Quiet fills the empty road. Cold congeals like mold on old man's bones. He accepts the way things are. He savors the shiver of winter. He pulls his blanket closer. He pokes the fire to flame. Lights on homes proclaim folks feel safe and warm. Snow blankets the roof. Far off at night, a boat slides toward him on a river of ice. He steps aboard, quiet and alone. That poem I submitted to the new online fireweed, and also to a poem coming out of to a magazine coming out of Seattle. And I inadvertently double submitted. I never do that. And then both editors wanted the poem. So I had to talk to both editors, and they agreed as long as the other editor, the other magazine was acknowledged. And so that poem, When Are Nice, Can Appear in Two Places. It's, I guess. So the other thing I write about almost constantly, it seems, maybe the majority of the poems in this forthcoming book have to do with climate change. While we're so closely focused on COVID, right? COVID is like the trees and climate change like the forest. Right? We're almost missing the forest for the trees. Sad to say, but climate change is getting its recognition, but unfortunately, action is incommensurate. So here's a poem called At the Last Minute. Half an hour late for your clinic appointment. You have to reschedule 2 weeks from now. Your case could be terminal by then. At the last minute, your tax accountant understates your income. So IRS demands you refile and hope for the best. At the last minute, the crows are fighting to copulate and nest in your backyard. The occasional crust you toss goes unnoticed. At the last minute, your distant child calls. It's been too long. You don't know where to begin. You fear you may never be called again. 10 years too late to slow down climate change. You realized you missed the last appointment. The clinic is closed and no one can be rescheduled. And here's one that sort of brings together some gardening, some climate, some and a bunch of these themes perhaps. It's called Farewell Pears. My 70-year-old pear tree could feel one of her 3 main arms crack, bend, and not quite break. Global warming left spring rainless, so every blossom turned into a pear. The ancient tree held countless progeny. Great-grandmotherhood so heavy, her wood was bound to fail to bear the vast load she bore. They say when trees approach their end, they put out fruit like never before. Last chance to pass on heritage. I amputate her twisted arm to give her a few more years. No taste compares to succulent farewell pears. Are we doing all right for time, John? Room for another one or two?
I have to unmute. Yes.
What?
Oh.
Okay.
We continue until 6 o'clock. It's only 5:42 now.
Okay.
10 minutes in order to ask people to ask questions and make comments.
Okay.
Give you 10 more minutes to read.
Okay, I'll try. I got 3 more here at hand. Mia said you couldn't step in the same river twice. And that's Heraclitus's pronouncement on the matter in ancient Greece. And so this is another childhood poem, which sort of contradicts that insofar as it's possible to do. It's called Stepping in the Same River Twice. August 1950, when I was going on 7, my father drove our 49 Chevrolet down the curvy Columbia Gorge Highway. Dick Henry took a photo of smiling Dad, Mom in her prime, Sister Pat and me, grinning like children of the sun. At our feet, Columbia, still a river then, rolled on, its current reduced today, 2 slack lakes held back by dams. Rivers could confirm our family amity, but foster too an unspoken gender divide. Mom and Pat waited evenings in camp, while Dad and I chased fly hatch on the Locksaw. We caught trout for dinner that Mom cooked. In darkness, we ate by white lantern light. My sister Pat is sitting right there. Patricia Siverly. She was in the occasion. My other sister hadn't arrived yet. So Diane. And Pat gave me corrected a lot of my details on there. I had dates wrong and everything else. And she said, no, it happened much earlier. So that's great to have confirmation. I've been reading a lot of W.G. Sebald, the novelist, German novelist. Fantastic on these very matters of memory and time. If you ever get a chance to read the novels of Sebald, Sebald, look him up. Right? It's wonderful. He died in 2001. This is After Cha Dao, again, another Chinese sourced poem. Chang'an was a major city in ancient China. The Heart Sutra is a wonderful sutra in Buddhism that is only like 2 pages long. It's usually chanted by groups. I think of him sitting in Chang'an, brush poised over the scroll to make each syllable come true. I picture him leaving the monastery to wander in search of hermit masters, appearing at the edge of firelight. The master of few words takes his place among acolytes, chanting the Heart Sutra in unison. By morning, he is gone, traveling solo through autumn rain. White clouds hover over mountains. To be alone is all we can do. We hold the brush until we can say how silence opens before us. And last, Starry Night. I might as well try this one, which would be the title poem if the book ends up named Starry Night. Things we can never know flit like bats across the streetlight. We see them only in passing. They are shadows of the psyche, invisible as exoplanets wavering the light of their star. Most of the time, our real intentions swirl around us like dark matter. We like to think we know better. We follow our unconscious drives to lives of mundane distraction. Years pass before we find our star. Things we can never know flit like acrobatic bats, too quick for us to see where they go. Thank you.